Let me tell you what my deep research and basically vision is.
I hope there's Bigfoot. I don't think there is.
I'm not telling you nothing.
The aliens won't let it happen. Happening now, breaking.
Bernie Sanders is angry.
Bears beats Battlestar Galactica.
What are the tips? Give me some tips on how to work with Wes Anderson.
Be ready to speak very fast and very clearly, because that's definitely one key thing.
I will only tell the truth. I will only
Until you and 6 kids you barely know in wet bathing suits have surrounded 9 chimpanzees outside of a Wendy's. You probably really don't know yourself, okay?
Yep. And we back.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to your new favorite podcast and the best in political, sports, and paranormal news coverage. I'm your host, Joe Rogan, and this is In the Shed. This is episode 47, so whether you're back for more or finding us for the first time this week, hey, thanks for tuning in. It's early Friday morning, August 5th, and I'm in a shed in the backyard of my home in Alabama. Also, I can hang out with you tools and talk about the latest headlines, stories, and rumors in the world of politics, sports, and the paranormal. I'm your host, it's me, filling in for Wes. I'm your host, Joe Rogan. Now we will get millions of views and lots of advertisers our way. It's bright and early. I haven't even had my 3 cups of black coffee yet, and we recording a show. Hopefully, I don't get flagged for claiming to be Mr. Joseph Maldonado Rogan. I'm glad to be back in the shed, glad to be doing a news show and hanging out with you guys again. The last few episodes that we have done, we've released 2 interview episodes in a row, 2 conversations in a row, which I thought were both phenomenal episodes, 2 of our better episodes. Big shout out to both Darren Schaefer and Miggy C for being on the show. And if you haven't checked them out yet, go listen to episode 45 about D.B. Cooper with Darren Schaefer and episode 46 with Miggy C, where we talk about addiction and recovery and faith and hip-hop. And our usual rhythm is to do 3 news shows and then 1 important conversation. But after I recorded that episode with Miggy C, I couldn't sit on it. I couldn't wait. I just felt like it was too important. He had too important of a story. And, you know, sometimes I get some flack from people. I'm going to read an email in a minute, one of those people. They say, you know, hey, Wes, pick a lane. You say you're a news show, you talk about, you know, silly conspiracies and cryptids, and then you talk about actual politics, and you talk about sports, and then sometimes you're interviewing people. Yeah, that's what we do. We're a different type of news show. We're a truly independent news show, and sometimes I think there should be good news offered up. Sometimes I think news should involve learning about your past. Sometimes I think news should involve having conversations that are interesting, conversations that are important, that matter, that encourage you, that remind you of the goodness of life. So yeah, we are a news show. But we're a different type of news show, and we're going to keep doing it that way. Recorded another conversation last night. Recorded our In the Shed with Wes college football preview show with Fifth Down College Football's Mark Shipper. Really cool guy, really knowledgeable about the game. And I'm looking forward to putting that episode out in a couple of weeks. A lot's happening on the show, a lot of big things. We're moving and shaking. I don't know what that means, but I said it's early. But we're growing, and I thank you for your support. I do got to tell you, though, I walked into the house the other day after cutting the grass. We have a pretty big side yard. We have a small front yard. We have a backyard. My wife and I argue over who gets to cut the grass because it's good time of exercise, some time out in the sun. in time away from refereeing these children who we love. But yeah. And it was my turn, so I was mowing the grass. It's hard to make sure that they all stay cut at the same time. We have a push mower. We're not in that riding lawnmower stage of life just yet, you know. We don't have bank like that. So I'm out there in the 105 degree, 112 degree humidity of Alabama, mowing the grass. I get done. I'm darn near dead from heat stroke. I walk in the house. I walk into the kitchen to get a bottle of water. And sitting at the table, sitting upright in the chair, is my little fat bobtail cat, Lulu. Lulu is a rescue. We rescue, not shop around here. We got 2 rescue cats, had a third, but he passed away. And we got a dog named Susie. You might have seen her on the Twitter feed. And Lulu was the runt of the litter, okay? But no longer is she the runt, you know? She's had a good life, and she's about 8, 9. What is she? She got to be 9.5. She's 9.5 years old now. And she put on some weight. Part of it was grief weight after her brother Samuel died. That's sounds made up, but totally true. But she a fat cat, and I can say that. That's not fat shaming. We talking about animals, okay? Don't cancel me. I already claimed to be Joe Rogan, and that's probably going to get me a ding, But she's sitting at the table. She's in a chair. She's sitting upright at the table like she a person. And I was like, look at this fat cat over here, just, you know. And it reminded me when I called her fat out loud. And I was like, get your fat self down off the table. It reminded me of an experience I had as a child. If you don't know me, if you haven't seen the picture of me, take a look at the artwork for this show. I'm not a big guy, okay? I'm built like a praying mantis with a beard. I'm tall and slender. I'm like Slender Man. And I've always been that way. I've always been thin. When I was a kid, I was thin as a rail. And I remember one time I was in 3rd grade. And we went to the high school football game, which was always a big deal on an Alabama Friday night. And I was sitting with my parents, with my family, watching the football game, super into it, and decided to go get some peanut M&Ms and a Coca-Cola from the concession stand. So I get some money from my mama. She good like that. Shout out Linda. And I start to kind of slide down the road like you have to do at football games. And I get all the way out to the aisle. And the last man that I have to slide by looks me up and down. And he yells. He yells at me. I'm 3rd grade. He yells at me. Hey, fatty! Fat, 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 fat! Fatty! And I was shook. I was legitimately shook. Because I was not fat. And this man that I've never seen before in my life is yelling at me in public at the top of his lungs. Because of the band playing, my parents didn't hear this. I'm over there standing by myself and this man just, hey, fatty, fat, 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 right in my face. And it scared me. So I went and got my peanut M&Ms and my Coca-Cola. And I was afraid to go back by this man. I ain't want nothing to do with him. I stayed down in the end zone area and threw the football with my friends the rest of the game. After the game was over, my dad was like, you missed a great game, son. I thought you were going to come back. And I was like, yeah, I was having fun with my friends. All because some man in a trench coat yelled fatty at me. I wasn't a fatty. I'm still not a fatty. As an adult, I realized that man was most probably drunk. As a 3rd grader, I did not understand how prevalent public intoxication really is. But as an adult, I think that man was probably drunk. But I had like a That's So Raven flashback moment when I yelled at my cat this week to get her fat self off the table. And all of a sudden, I remembered this man in the trench coat. fatty, yelling at me. And I don't know why. I don't know why I shared that story with you. It has nothing to do with anything we're going to cover on the show tonight. I just miss you, and it's early in the morning, and so you just, you got that one for free. But let's move on to some comments and corrections. Big congrats to you, our listeners. Our show has now surpassed 5,000 downloads. A small step for most, but a big one for us. I cannot thank you enough for your continued support as we build this thing together. Our humble little show is being listened to across the globe. We are, of course, very popular in India, but we are also on fire in France this week with 52 new listeners there. We're doing very well in the UK and are currently averaging more listeners per episode than ever before. It keeps on going up. It's like the opposite of the stock market. We are on an ascent, is what I'm trying to say. Words are hard in the morning. We're on the ascent, my babies. We're also closing in on 6,000 followers on Twitter. Not verified yet, but we gaining on it. You can follow the show there at In the Shed 4. Before we get into the show, I want to remind you to subscribe to our newsletter. A great way to support the show and keep up with what's going on behind the scenes. It's only $4 a month. Very reasonable. And it goes a long way in keeping that 50-foot extension cord plugged in. If you give me $4, I'll keep bringing you the news. To subscribe, email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. If you don't want to subscribe to the newsletter, that's fine. How about just sending us a $4 tip? Just a one-time $4 tip so that we can keep this thing going. I can't do this without you and would greatly appreciate it. We got a great show for you tonight, but first let's get to some listener emails. Our first email comes from Max from Nebraska, who writes, Wes, I can't believe you had someone from a Netflix doc on your show. The D.B. Cooper episode was amazing. You're really coming up in the world. I don't know about all that, Max from Nebraska, but I certainly appreciate your kind words. Thanks for listening to the show. Darren Schaefer is a really cool guy. Darren Schaefer was phenomenal. So knowledgeable about the D.B. Cooper case. Walked us through the entirety of it. Went through almost every theory known to man. Was so generous with his time. I've never met this guy. That was my first time talking to him, and he spent 3.5 hours chopping up the story of D.B. Cooper with us. Phenomenal. So if you haven't heard that episode, go back and listen. It's episode 45 of this show, a couple episodes ago. And check out Darren's other work, his podcast, The Cooper Vortex, and his new project he's working on, a podcast entitled The Book of Darren. Check those out. I know that he will appreciate that. Thank you for listening to the show. Our next email comes from Shannon from San Diego, which means no, this is a family show, who's some of y'all will get that reference, who says, Wes, the conversation you had with Miggy C was very moving. I'm in recovery also with 6 months under my belt. Your interview gave me encouragement that I can keep going. You earned a new fan. Hey, thank you so much, Shannon. Congrats on 6 months. That's a big deal. This show is one that is very supportive of those in recovery. I want to be very clear about that. Again, that episode with Miggy was phenomenal. It tied our all-time record for most downloads in a 24-hour period. Very quickly, it will move into one of the top 10 shows that we have as far as downloads, probably the next day or two. I've known Miggy since he was 12. To reconnect with him and for him to share his story, for all that he's overcome, for where he is in life now, I couldn't be more proud of that man. And he's a very talented recording artist. He's got some projects that he's working on. His first EP is coming out soon. You're right. I'm sorry. YRIS. And follow him on Facebook. Find him on Twitter. Give that man some of your money. All right. Purchase his EP when it comes out. Support him. He's made incredible life changes. And anything I can do to support Miggy and be a friend to him, I'm all in. Phenomenal episode. I'll have him back on the show some other time as well. And good luck to you, Shannon. Keep at it. One day at a time, one moment at a time. Do the next right thing. Go to a meeting. Find some support. And you have some support here as well. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And finally, Tanner from New York, state, not city. Actually, it actually says that in parentheses, New York State, not city. Tanner writes, Wes, your show is so hard to follow. Sometimes you're a news show, sometimes you're interviewing guests, sometimes you're talking NBA, and sometimes you're talking mermaids. Pick a lane, get better audio quality, and get over yourself. It is apparent to me, Tanner, that you've listened to several episodes of the show. At least 2. If you know that we talk NBA and mermaids and do interviews, that's at least 2, maybe 3 different episodes. We actually talked mermaids on 2 shows because it was we had this lady for a little while that kept writing in wanting us to talk about mermaids. And at the time, our show was averaging like 45 listeners an episode. We're like triple that now. But I was like, hey, mermaids it is. We aim to please, Tanner. I'm sorry that we have not pleased you. I will not pick a lane. I won't do it. This is my lane. It's a lane that is a big lane, 18-wheeler lane, semi-truck lane, bus lane. We just doing runway lane. We doing our own thing, Tanner. And we are a news show, but we a different type of news show. I hope you'll continue to listen. If you don't like what we're covering, buddy, fast forward. Do that 15-second skip thing until we get to the next segment. We got about 2 hours of content on almost every episode. And if you just want to check out the interview shows, then hey, every 3 or 4 episodes we'll have one for you. If you like the sports, fast forward to the sports. If you want to give us a chance with the paranormal and the politics, we appreciate that also, Tanner. Are you a happy person? Are you happy, Tanner? I'm not going to argue with you. Tanner big mad. I'm happy. I'm happy. All right, let's switch to this. Let's get to the news in the world of politics. And let's hit the headlines. Gaslighted, abortion advocates falsely claim pregnant women won't get life-saving care, writes CBN. Tensions flare in the Taiwan Strait, reports the Dispatch. Law-abiding gun owners will not harm you, but criminals will, says Real Clear Politics. From Politico, Dick Cheney calls Trump a coward in ad for daughter's re-election bid. And finally, the law can't force Alex Jones to be human, but we're seeing exactly what it can do, and that is according to MSNBC. Our first story in the world of politics, Taliban leader, Afghan soil won't be used to launch attacks. Taliban Supreme Leader Mullah Hibutullah Akhundzada nailed it. Said Wednesday that Afghan soil will not be used to launch attacks against other countries, and he asked the international community to not interfere in Afghanistan's internal affairs. The Taliban say they are adhering to an agreement they signed with the United States in 2020 before retaking power, in which they promised to fight terrorists. Since their takeover last year, they have repeatedly said that Afghanistan would not be used as a launching pad for attacks against other countries. We assure our neighbors, the region, and the world that we will not allow anyone to use our territory to threaten the security of other countries. We also want other countries not to interfere in our internal affairs, Akhundzada said in an address ahead of the Eid al-Adha holiday. The Taliban were ousted by a U.S.-led coalition in 2001 for harboring Osama bin Laden, mastermind of the 9/11 attacks in the United States. The religious group captured power again in mid-August during the chaotic last weeks of the U.S. and NATO withdrawal from Afghanistan. The international community has been wary of any recognition or cooperation with the Taliban, except for China and Russia, especially after they restricted the rights of women and minorities, measures that harken back to their harsh rule when they were last in power in the late 90s. Akhundzada, the spiritual chief of the Taliban, has remained a reclusive figure. He rose to leader of the Islamist movement in a swift transition of power after a 2016 U.S. drone strike that killed his predecessor, Mullah Akhtar Mansour. After taking over, Akhundzada secured the backing of al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri, who showered the cleric with praise, calling him the Emir of the Faithful. The endorsement by bin Laden's heir helped seal his jihadist credentials with the Taliban's longtime allies. However, in his message, Akhundzada said, within the framework of mutual interaction and commitment, we want good diplomatic, economic, and political relations with the world, including the United States, and we consider this in the interest of all sides. A 3-day assembly of Islamic clerics and tribal elders in the Afghan capital that concluded Saturday included pledges to support the Taliban and calls for international community to recognize the country's Taliban-led government. In a surprise development, the reclusive Akhundzada came to Kabul from his base in southern Kandahar province and addressed the gathering Friday. It was believed to be his first visit to the Afghan capital since the Taliban had seized power. In an hour-long speech at the assembly carried by state radio, Akhundzada called the Taliban takeover Afghanistan a victory for the Muslim world. A powerful earthquake in June killed more than 1,000 people in eastern Afghanistan, igniting yet another crisis for the economically struggling country. Overstretched aid groups already keeping millions of Afghans alive rushed supplies to the quake victims, but most countries responded tepidly to Taliban calls for international help. The international cutoff of Afghanistan's financing has deepened the country's economic collapse and fueled its humanitarian crisis. I'm highlighting this story because I'm sure that you have seen in the media and on mainstream news networks, cable news networks, that President Biden has launched an airstrike that took out the aforementioned Al-Zawahiri, who was Osama bin Laden's heir apparent as the leader, primarily militarily leader of the Taliban, killing him. And that has gotten a lot of pub. And this story, which came out a week or so before, got almost none. And it's just an interesting thing, and it's something to keep an eye on. The Taliban was very eager to be back in power in Afghanistan. And they had agreed to a set and cert of guidelines. I would stop short of calling it a diplomatic agreement, but a set of guidelines they would keep if we would go home, and when we withdrew if they took over again. And on the one hand, as soon as the Taliban has gone into power again in Afghanistan, we saw reports of persecution and rights removal and a harsh rule that harken back to the 90s that you would expect with a Taliban government. It's also true that the way in which we pulled out of Afghanistan and the way that we put a hold on all of their international banking and the money that belonged to the government of that people really contributed to a humanitarian crisis that in a harsh winter and a harsh summer have really been hard on the people of Afghanistan. Maybe not as hard as bombs being dropped, but hey, that's a different conversation. And look, international affairs are complicated. War is complicated, and usually there aren't really very many people that come out on top of a war. You might have a country or an army or a group that quote-unquote wins, but when we go to war, everybody loses except for the big banks, the military-industrial complex, and everybody that gets all of these fat contracts from governmental agencies and the military. And look, I'm not a fan of the Taliban, okay? Should go without saying, but it doesn't. I have to say it, and I'm going to say it. I'm not a fan of the Taliban. And I'm certainly not a fan of Al-Zawahiri. The man purportedly helped Osama bin Laden plan the attacks on 9/11. He's waged war on the U.S. and on infidels for decades. He's not a good person, okay? But the timing of this airstrike is a little bit interesting. And even more interesting than that to me is to watch closely how the Afghanistan government, the Taliban-led government, responds, or if they respond, to such an airstrike. Because here they are a week ago. This reclusive religious leader of the Taliban comes to the capital city. He makes a big speech. He says, we're not going to mess with any other country. We're not going to launch attacks. We're not going to allow attacks to be launched from our soil. All we ask in return is that the same consideration is offered and extended to us. And a week later, we launch an airstrike that kills one of the top leaders of the Taliban for decades. A guy that isn't necessarily in active leadership in Kabul, but who is a figurehead for the Taliban and has been since Osama bin Laden was out of power. It's going to be interesting. Are they just going to suck it up and let it go? Are they going to just ignore it because they're in such financial straits and they need the help of the world and they're trying to improve relations? Or is it going to be a further deterrent? A deterrent to peace, a deterrent to normalization, a deterrent to the Afghan people getting the help from the world community that they so desperately need. And look, I understand the position of President Biden. This is something that largely will just be celebrated in the public sphere. Another dead terrorist. Justice has been served. I get it. And I don't even entirely disagree with it. And I don't know that we can take a Taliban-led government at their word. I'm not suggesting as much. All I'm saying is that the timing is a bit curious. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens next. They come out and say, we won't attack anyone, please don't attack us, and a week later an airstrike. I'm not a conspiracy theorist necessarily. Some of our listeners are. But President Biden makes this airstrike when he has just come down with COVID for the second time in a 2.5 week period, and his polling numbers are at like low 30%. His vice president's numbers are lower. Inflation is over 9%. We're inching closer to the midterms. He wouldn't be the first American president to say, hey, I got this guy. Remember that when you go to the ballot box. I'm not saying that was President Biden's sole motivation. I'm not endorsing that as truth or as fact. I'm just saying the timing of the whole thing. When you look at the big picture, it's curious and it's worth considering. And it's worth watching closely to see what happens in that region where China is making inroads. And where they just came out saying, we want to normalize relationships diplomatically with everyone in the world, including the U.S., and our response is an airstrike. If it brings any amount of peace to the families of the victims of those in 9/11, hey, I'm here for that. I get it. I understand that sometimes as president, you have to make tough decisions. You get information that this person is in this place. We've been trying to find them and track them for years. We have an opportunity. What do you want to do? I get it. I'm not casting aspersions on the president. I'm just saying we need to pay attention. And it's going to be interesting. And I hope that it doesn't lead to further decimation of the people of Afghanistan. Not the jihadists, not the Taliban-led government, but just the people, man. Because just like us, they have mamas over there who love their kids and who are trying to raise them. They have grandpas and grandmas that dote on their grandbabies. They have brothers and sisters. It's not a country full of terrorists, full of bad people. For the most part, they're people just like we're people. They're trying to live their life. And they're struggling. They're struggling to find food. They're struggling to stay cool. They're struggling to have clean drinking water. The government doesn't have access to any of the money because it happens to be a Taliban-led government, and we're like, hey, we're not giving money to the Taliban, which I get. But in the big picture, I do think about the children over there, the mamas, the grandparents, the normal folks that are just experiencing the aftershock and the hardship of war. They have nothing to do with the Taliban. They have nothing to do with jihad. They have nothing to do with hatred of America. They have nothing to do with our economy, with our president, with his decision making, with Al-Zawahiri. That are just people. We'll keep an eye on it. Our next story in the world of politics, Chinese homebuyers across 22 cities refuse to pay mortgages. Across China, homebuyers are refusing to pay mortgages as property developers drag on construction projects, escalating the country's real estate crisis and risks of bad debt for banks. Buyers of 35 projects across 22 cities have decided to stop paying mortgages as of July 12 due to project delays and a drop in real estate prices, Citigroup Inc. analysts led by Griffin Chan wrote in a research report distributed on Wednesday. The payment refusals underscore how the storm engulfing China's property sector is now affecting the country's middle class, posing a threat to social stability. Chinese banks already grappling with challenges from liquidity stress among developers now also have to brace for home buyer defaults. Now it's a critical time for social stability, said Chan, adding that the foregoing of down payments may bring social instability. A drop in home values hasn't helped either. Average selling prices of properties in nearby projects in 2022 were on average 15% lower than purchase costs in the past 3 years, according to Citigroup's research. The contagion is spreading to banks. Non-performing loans triggered by the wave of mortgage payment snubs could reach as much as 561 billion yuan, about 1.4% of the outstanding mortgage balance, according to Chan. While the overall impact on banks will be manageable, state lenders, including China Construction Bank Corp., Postal Savings Bank of China, and Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, have many more exposure to mortgages and could suffer setbacks and dampened investor sentiment, Chan wrote. Postal Savings Bank shares fell 3.3% as of 2 p.m. in Shanghai, while ICBC declined 2%. The CSI 300 Bank Index fell as much as 2.7%, the most since April 25th. For Chinese banks, the non-performing loan ratios of mortgages was well below the level of other forms of lending, according to the banking regulator. At China Construction Bank, only 0.2% of its residential mortgages were bad as of December, compared with 1.42% for total loans. The latest development comes at a time when renewed risk of COVID restrictions also pose a threat to the industry. A key real estate index fell for a third day Wednesday, heading for the lowest level since March. A Bloomberg index of China's high-yield dollar bonds fell to the lowest in a decade as of Tuesday. Domestic bonds of large property developers, including Jimdale Corp. And Country Garden Holdings, also slumped to record lows. So, a small percentage of the Chinese population, but in 22 different cities, have just decided, hey, we not paying our mortgage. Home values are declining. Construction that's been promised and expected isn't coming through, so we aren't going to pay you. And it's starting to have an impact on the overall economic and societal standing of some very important banks, hedge funds, and investment companies in China. I highlight this story because I find it to be very interesting as well. China is not a country where the people push back on the government in a public way very often, okay? Free speech is not a thing. Xi Jinping will have you disappeared. You'll just up and vanish. It don't matter if you're a multi-millionaire. You'll just up and vanish for a couple months. You'll come back completely agreeing with everything the government has to say. So I wouldn't think that the government would take kindly. A government that has their hands in the pockets of all the major banks, of all companies. Basically, you have to figure that if there's a big corporation or company in China, that the government is getting some of that funding as well, is able to dictate to them. And here in 22 different cities, you have people just saying enough is enough. That's interesting. I'm not seeing this reported very widely by mainstream media, but we're going to highlight it here because we have to keep an eye on what's happening in China. China, who is not very happy with us right now. They have cut off diplomatic discussions when it comes to issues of military, when it comes to issues of climate change, when it comes to the extradition of criminals, all because Nancy Pelosi has visited Taiwan last week. They were none too pleased by that. They told her, do not come. In China's opinion, Taiwan belongs to them. In Taiwan's opinion, they are their own independent nation. And we have the very convoluted stance as America. Our official stance as a nation is the one China policy, meaning that we recognize that there is one China. However, if China tries to invade Taiwan, hey, we got a problem with that. Does it make a lot of sense? No. Is it straddling the fence? Absolutely, but it's a delicate balance when you're talking international diplomacy and affairs. And China, who with the Silk Road Initiative is making inroads all over the world, investing heavily in Africa, partnering with Afghanistan, who has designs and plans on being the world superpower militarily, economically, and every other way by 2025, is a nation that we have to keep an eye on. And so when you have civil unrest in their nation and pushback in their nation and things happening on an economic and a societal level, it's worth paying attention to. And hey, I don't know, maybe we have just incidentally learned why Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Maybe we're going to find out that her husband is invested in all these hedge funds and banks over in China, and these people just stopped paying their mortgages, and then the value of those stocks have decreased by 2.5% already, and she's like, hey, if you don't fix it, Chinese government, I'm fixing to go give some validity to the Taiwanese independence. I'm going to go make a visit to Taiwan, and I'm going to ruffle your feathers. I'm going to flex on you one time. You better get out there and fix it because my money is taken. I'm just kidding. I'm spitballing, okay? I have no evidence of that. I'm not saying that that's factual information. I'm just talking about an interesting story. I'm in a shed in Alabama. Calm down. Calm down. It's just a joke because Nancy Pelosi's husband's finances have been in the news lately. But it's an interesting time. Our relationship with China is very tense right now. And make no mistake about it, they are a international superpower. In a lot of ways, they have a stranglehold on us economically. We've outsourced so much of our technology, so much of our manufacturing to China. And I don't want war with China. I don't want a Cold War with China. I want peace with everybody, okay? But we have to pay attention, and we have to be wise, and we have to be careful. And so when I see a story like this pop up in a nation where free speech isn't really a thing, it definitely makes my ears perk up a little bit. And I don't blame these people in these 22 cities. I wish I had the option to, hey, we not paying our mortgage right now. Not until my roof get replaced. Not until things happen as they should be. I don't have that option. But people are trying it in China. And it's going to be interesting to see how it works out for them. Our next story in the world of politics, 69-year-old man arrested in Tokyo discovered to have been driving for 50 years without a license. That's right, my babies. We keeping it international today. We going from a very serious situation in Afghanistan to a very serious situation in China to something hilarious in Tokyo. Because that's how we do the news around here, and we're the only ones doing it this way. So hey, Tanner from New York State, not city. Vibe with us, my baby. Vibe with us. We offering you something you can't find anywhere else, and subscribe to our newsletter. On May 15th, Tatsuo Matsumoto struck a vehicle in front of him while driving in Tokyo with his Harley-Davidson three-wheeled motorcycle. I love it. This man out here driving, he's 69 years old, and he's like, hey, I don't have a license. I'm going with a Harley-Davidson three-wheeler. This man is a G. This man is a G. Mr. Matsumoto is my hero. Because if I was 69 years old and I did not have a driver's license, I would probably pick something a little safer. Something a little less flashy. But no. This man going with a Harley-Davidson three-wheeler. Before police could arrive, Mr. Matsumoto sped off. The dent he left cost the owners 400,000 yen, approximately $2,913, to fix. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police launched an investigation and were able to identify the 69-year-old's motorcycle through footage captured by the victim's dash cam. Everybody just be having dash cams and cameras over in Japan, apparently. Around 2 months later, a police officer stopped Tatsuo's motorcycle in Kyoto, Tokyo. Tatsuo, however, sped into a narrow path where a car would not fit. My guy, Mr. Matsumoto. The officer then chased after the motorcycle on foot and eventually caught up to the man at a dead... How you gonna let an officer on foot catch you, my boy? Mr. 69-year-old Tatsuo Matsumoto. You are on a You're on a Harley Davidson. You can't be catched by a police officer on foot. Maybe he was stopped at a stop sign. I feel like he was still obeying the laws of traffic even after committing a hit and run. He's 69 years old. He's a very respectful man, okay? Tatsuo initially told the officer that he left his driver's license at home before he eventually admitted that he did not have one and unfortunately was arrested shortly after. It was discovered that Tatsuo had failed the written portion of his motorcycle license exam 6 times before giving up in the late 1980s. Wow. The man failed his written portion 6 times, and then he gave up in the 1980s before I was born. Your boy was born in 1989. Mr. Matsumoto gave up passing that test before I was born. And I'm just saying, if he failed it 6 times, maybe it's because he has some type of difficulty, you know? Maybe he didn't get all the way through school because he had to help his family. Maybe he's dyslexic. Like, can we cut Mr. Matsumoto a break? 69 years old. He explained that he had been riding motorcycles since he was 17 when he was first caught driving without a license. Tatsuo was caught in his 50s as well. Man, this is a 3rd time. I hope they don't have no 3 strikes and you're outlaws over there in Japan. The 69-year-old purchased the motorcycle 4 years ago and told the dealer that he had forgotten his license at home when he purchased the bike for around 6 million yen, approximately $43,712. So he doing all right for himself, purchasing a $43,000 motorcycle. And apparently this whole I left my license at home thing has been a very effective strategy for him in the past. 4 years ago when I bought a Harley for about 6 million yen at a motorcycle store, the clerk asked me to show my license, but I said I forgot my license. I will bring it back later, Tatsuo told NTV News. NTV, not MTV. I wish he should be telling MTV News because he's so dope. It doesn't say anything about this man's sentence. If he's facing a fine or jail time, I hope that they're not going to put this 69-year-old man in prison for living his best life. Okay, he had 1 hit and run. 1 hit, in 60 years of driving this thing. Don't we all have at least 1 hit and run? Haven't we all just at least once bumped somebody? And then I probably shouldn't be admitting that on a podcast, should I? I never have, for the record. I'm just defending my boy, Mr. Matsumoto, because he is a character, and he just keeps saying, "Hey, I left my license at home," and up until now, it's always worked for him. And when you find a strategy that works, you stick to it. And I'm just saying, I hope he got a very affordable fine. I hope that he pays for the other person to have their car fixed and everybody live happily ever after. Tip of the cap to you, Mr. Matsumoto, for being a G. And I'd love to have you on the show. If you hear this by chance, if you're listening in Japan, find this man. Give him my email address, intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. We'll have him on the show. I'll hire an interpreter if I have to. Or learn Japanese, whichever one. And we the only show that will cover this. And that's why you here, my babies. That's why you here. Our last story in the world of politics. 2 decades of Alzheimer's research may be based on deliberate fraud that has cost millions of lives. Last month, the drug company Genentech reported on the first clinical trials of the drug Crenezumab, a drug targeting amyloid proteins that form sticky plaques in the brains of Alzheimer's disease patients. The drug had been particularly effective in animal models, and the trial results were eagerly awaited as one of the most promising treatments in years. It did not work. Crenezumab did not slow or prevent cognitive decline in people with a predisposition towards Alzheimer's. Last year, the FDA narrowly approved the use of Aduhelm, a new drug from Biogen that the company has priced so highly that it's expected to drive up the price of Medicare for everyone in America, even those who never need the drug. Aduhelm was the first drug to be approved that fights the accumulation of those amyloid plaques in the brain. What makes the approval of the $56,000 a dose drug so controversial is that while it does decrease plaques, it doesn't actually slow Alzheimer's. In fact, clinical trials were suspended in 2019 after the treatment showed no clinical benefits, which did not keep Biogen from seeking the drug's approval or pricing it astronomically. Over the last 2 decades, Alzheimer's drugs have been notable mostly for having a 99% failure rate in human trials. It's not unusual for drugs that are effective in vitro and in animal models to turn out to be less than successful when used in humans, but Alzheimer's has a record that makes the batting average in other areas look like Hall of Fame material. And now we have a good idea of why. Because it looks like the original paper that established the amyloid plaque model as the foundation of Alzheimer's research over the last 16 years might not just be wrong, but a deliberate fraud. Whoa. The suspicion that something was more than a little wrong with the model that is getting almost all Alzheimer's research funding, $1.6 billion in the last year alone, began with a fight over the drug Simuflam. The drug was being pushed into trials by its manufacturer, Cassava Sciences, but a group of scientists who reviewed the drug maker's claims about Simuflam believed that it was exaggerating its potential. So they did what any reasonable person would do. They purchased short sell positions in Cassava Sciences stock, filed a letter with the FDA calling for a review before allowing the drug to go to trial, and hired an investigator to provide some support for this position. As Science reports, it was that investigator, Vanderbilt University neuroscientist and junior professor Matthew Schrag, who tipped over the whole apple cart to discover that it wasn't just the Cassava's drug that was ineffective. There's good evidence that for the last 16 years, almost everyone has had the wrong idea about the cause of Alzheimer's because of a fraud. In 2006, Nature published a paper titled "A Specific Amyloid B Protein Assembling in the Brain Impairs Memory." Using a series of studies in mice, the paper concluded that memory deficits in middle-aged mice were directly caused by accumulations of a soluble substance called AB56. This was a specific form of a group known as toxic oligomers that had long been suspected as the possible precursor of amyloid plaques. The paper that went on to directly connect that condition to cognitive deficits associated with Alzheimer's disease independently of other conditions affecting the aging brain. The study didn't come out of nowhere. It only seemed to confirm one of several hypotheses about Alzheimer's that had been circulating for many years by that point. After all, the brains of Alzheimer's patients do contain plaques that can sometimes seriously alter the structure of the brain. Those plaques do contain amyloids. It's not much of a stretch to suggest that those amyloids are a primary cause of the associated memory loss and dementia. Amyloids cause plaques, plaques cause damage, the damage causes Alzheimer's, etc. That 2006 paper was primarily authored by neuroscience professor Sylviane Lesne and given more weight by the name of well-respected neuroscientist Karen Ash, both from the robust neuroscience research team at the University of Minnesota. It was Ash who produced the transgenic mice used in the study, which genuinely do appear to have Alzheimer's-like symptoms and that have since been used as the favored animal models for a generation of treatments. On her website, Ash called AB56 the first substance ever identified in brain tissue in Alzheimer's research that has been shown to cause memory impairment. The results of the study seem to demonstrate the amyloids to Alzheimer's pipeline with a clarity that even the most casual reader could understand, and it became one of, if not the most influential papers in all of Alzheimer's research. Not only has it been cited hundreds of times in other work, roughly 100 out of the 130 Alzheimer's drugs now working their way through trials are directly designed to attack the kind of amyloids featured in this paper. Both Ash and Lesne became neuroscience rock stars, the leaders of a wave based on their 2006 paper. What intrigued Schrag when he came back to the seminal work were the images in the paper that were supposed to show the relationship between memory issues and the presence of AB56 appeared to have been altered. Some of them appeared to have been pieced together from multiple images. Schrag shied away from actually accusing this foundational paper of being a fraud, but he definitely raised red flags. He raised those concerns discreetly at first in a letter sent directly to the National Institute of Health. Only when that letter failed to generate a response did Schrag bring his suspicions to others. Now, Science has concluded its 6-month review during which it consulted with image experts. What they found seems to confirm Schrag's suspicions. After reviewing the images, molecular biologist Elizabeth Bick said of the paper, The obtained experimental results might not have been the desired results, and that data might have been changed to better fit the hypothesis. Should this fraud turn out to be as extensive as it appears at first glance, the implications go well beyond just misdirecting tens of billions in funding and millions of hours of research over the last 2 decades. Since that 2006 publication, the presence or absence of this specific amyloid has often been treated as diagnostic of Alzheimer's. This means that patients who did die from Alzheimer's may have been misdiagnosed as having something else. Those whose dementia came from other causes may have falsely been dragged under the Alzheimer's umbrella. In every possible kind of study, whether it's as exotic as light therapy or long-running as nuns doing crossword puzzles, may have ultimately had results that were measured against a false yardstick. In the face of a potential fraud unearthed by Schrag, it's not as if the world has changed overnight. 4 months after Schrag submitted concerns to the NIH turned around and awarded Lesnay a 5-year grant to study Alzheimer's. That grant was awarded by Austin Yang, program director of the NIH's Institute on Aging. Yang also happens to be another of the co-authors of the 2006 paper. You've got to be kidding me. Science has carefully detailed the work done in the analysis of the images. Other researchers, including a 2008 paper from Harvard, have noted that AB56 is unstable, and there seems to be no sign of this substance in human tissues, making its targeting literally worse than useless. However, Lesnay claims to have a method for measuring AB56 and other oligomers in brain cells that has served as the basis of a series of additional papers, all of which are now in doubt. There seems to be no doubt that oligomers may play a role in cognitive impairment. However, that role may not be nearly as direct or as significant as a 2006 paper and subsequent papers by Lesnay have suggested. It's quite possible that the specific oligomer AB56 may not even exist outside of Ash's transgenic mice. And it seems highly likely that for the last 16 years, most research on Alzheimer's and most new drugs entering trials have been based on a paper that at best modified the results of its findings to make them appear more conclusive, and at worst is an outright fraud. It seems highly likely that for the last 16 years, most research on Alzheimer's and most new drugs entering trials have been based on a paper that at best modified the results of its findings to make them appear more conclusive, and at worst is an outright fraud. Why has this not been headline news, leading every show on cable news in America? How many millions of people are impacted by dementia and Alzheimer's, lose themselves to this degenerate disease? And now, the allegation is being raised that, at best, the cornerstone study that led to billions of dollars in funding and that formed the scaffolding for how Alzheimer's is even treated may be based on intentionally overblown claims or even possibly outright fraud. This is a big deal. This should be headline news. I don't understand why I'm not seeing this covered everywhere. I would like to see a rebuttal. I would like to see a rebuttal by the scientist Lesnay, by the NIH. I would like to see what they have to say. They should be quoted in this article. How can they not come out and say something? This is alarming. I'm afraid this type of stuff happens more often than we're aware. I'm not here on this show to just rail against every company, to rail against anybody that has money, to rail against the way that society is structured entirely, but hey, I'm going to keep it a buck with you. I'm going to give you the news that matters. And one thing that I will always object to is those who are in power being dishonest and being greedy at the expense of others. And if this study is correct, if the examination of this seminal paper is correct, if their deductions are correct, then make no mistake, that's exactly what has happened in this case. Overeager scientists who want to be important, who want position, who want influence, who want contracts, who want tenure, who want money, who want research, who want funding. Big Pharma who is ready to sink their teeth into anything that they can make money on. Even if these pills are entirely effective, and even if this study is entirely wrong, the fact that you would charge someone $56,000 per treatment who's suffering from Alzheimer's, it's an evil system. I'm all for paying people what they're worth. I know that things take research, they take time, they take manufacturing, yada, yada, yada. I get it. I'm not against profits. I'm against greed. $56,000 to someone who's suffering, that doesn't know where they are, that doesn't remember their family. It may be based on altogether fraud. We need an absolute overhaul when it comes to health care, what really amounts to sick care in our country. I remember I had some health problems, had some medicine that was prescribed to me to fix it. Went to pick it up. They rang up a bottle of 30 pills and said that will be $8,537. And I about fainted. Medicine that I needed to regulate certain internal organs to make sure that I'm healthy. And luckily I did have insurance. And after running it through my insurance, it was like $45. But not everybody has that. And even the insurance companies don't cover a lot of the things that need to be covered. And they fight you tooth and nail for you to get procedures that you need, for you to get the things that you need. Sometimes they try to make you pay up front and then reimburse you. There's so much wrong with how we do healthcare in our country. And I'm not a person with all the answers. I don't have it all figured out. There's people far smarter than me. I'm just a guy in Alabama in his shed in his backyard at 7:30 in the morning on 1 cup of coffee, okay? But I read that article because it highlights a societal problem, a problem at the societal level in our country. And because it's important. And because you need to know about it. And it's hard for me to read. To be honest with you, just reading through that article makes me kind of emotional. I lost my grandmother earlier this year, one of 3 grandparents that I have. And she suffered from dementia. And toward the end, there were times when we would visit, and it wasn't always apparent that she could make the connection of who we were. And she knew me my whole life. And she raised my pops. And I visited her on Christmases. And I drank Grey Pocono at her kitchen counter. And I played with her old perfume bottles. And there's a possibility that these companies are out here getting billions of dollars in funding and quote-unquote trying to treat dementia and Alzheimer's based on research that may be an intentional fraud or at least may have been intentionally exaggerated. I find that reprehensible. And I wanted you to know about it because I don't think it's going to be widely reported elsewhere. Just because it's been reported, just because this study has found this doesn't make it true. But it certainly should raise alarm bells. And the NIH should be held to account and should be made to take a further look. And all of that should be public. We have a lot of work to do. That's all for the world of politics. Let's switch to the world of sports. And let's hit the headlines. Brittany Griner sentenced to 9 years in a Russian prison. Lakers and LeBron James hold productive contract talks. Raiders top the Jags 27-11 in the Hall of Fame game. Kentucky and Gonzaga men's basketball teams sign on for a home-and-home series. Thunder retains stretch 4 Mike Muscala. Georgia football opens preseason camp ready to grind. And finally, the Big 12 title game to remain in Dallas through 2025. Well, my babies, Juan Soto has been traded, but I don't care. Because on this show, we don't talk baseball, okay? I like baseball. We made an exception last year when my Braves broke the curse of the show and won the World Series, but hey, we got other things to talk about today. So let's get to a much more important story in the world of sports than Juan Soto being traded. And that's the return of slam ball, my tools. That's right. I said slam ball is making its return. Slam ball to return in summer of 2023, founder announces. One of the wildest alternative sports of the 2000s is making a comeback. On the 20th anniversary of its television debut, Slam Ball founder Mason Gordon announced to TMZ Sports, as all major sports leagues do, that the league will return in the summer of 2023. The American version of the extremely physical trampoline-infused basketball league played its last season in 2008, when your boy was a senior in high school. Since then, it has popped up in various minor forms around the world, including in China, where it gained a sizable following. Gordon is partnering with producer Mike Tollin, who most recently executive produced ESPN's The Last Dance and The Captain, on the project. My partners and I have always looked at it and said, we're not going to come back until the market conditions are really optimal. And the alternative sports marketplace is just on fire, says Gordon. Younger audiences are really out there looking for a sport that they can call their own. After the over decade-long hiatus, slam ball with its short games and heavy action could be a hit in an age of social media where younger sports viewers aren't always watching full-length games. Slam ball just kind of fits the bill, Gordon says. They're 20-minute games, television half hours. People have always really gravitated toward the action. Yeah, slam ball is making a comeback. This trumps a lot of other stories that we could have covered because, hey, I wanted it to. And this is my shed. Did you ever watch Slam Ball? We're going to put a post up, a poll on Twitter and find out if you, like me, used to watch it on, I think, Spike TV, which is now Paramount. So as long as this is not only on Paramount Plus, I will be tuning in to Slam Ball. I hope they sign a deal with FS1 or ESPN. Trampolines and basketball. And a lot of fighting. And goaltending. And it's a great combination. It's entirely entertaining. And maybe some of these retired NBA players will come out of the woodwork. If I'm a slam ball team, my first phone call is to Yao Ming. Grow the sport in China. Okay, get you Yao Ming, post him up on a trampoline. The man don't even have to jump. Just put your arms in the air, Yao. If somebody come in there, you just truck him. I don't know how old he is now, 43, 47 years old, but hey, he's still 7'6". Even if he's been shrinking due to old age, he might be 7'3". Get in there and ruffle some feathers, Yao. I'm all for it. Bring on slam ball. All right, enough of that. Let's talk some football. One quick note to make in the world of the NFL before we get to our SEC West football preview, and that is that Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson has been suspended for 6 games. NFL fans, and especially Cleveland fans, have been waiting to see what punishment would be handed down by the independent arbiter, who happens to be a female judge, and immediately on social media and television, the backlash was astounding. People said, how could a female judge only suspend Deshaun Watson for 6 games with all of the stuff that he's been accused of, 20-some-odd accusers of impropriety during massages, despicable behavior. And I got to point out that the judge was ruling only based on precedent. And as we know, the NFL has not had a great history of setting precedent. But after the Ray Rice debacle, after everything during Deflategate, after everything that's happened over the course of wide receiver Josh Gordon's career, with others being suspended for long periods of time for marijuana use, Atlanta's wide receiver who got suspended for a whole year for making a $1,400 bet on one NFL game in which he was not playing, it just raises some eyebrows. The NFL has no choice but to appeal. They've already done so. They're probably going to ask for 12 to 14 games, and they'll probably settle in the middle at 8 to 10 games. Deshaun Watson will sit out for a little while, but probably not the first game of the year. because the NFL has chosen to appeal, he probably will be able to play week 1, and then when the appeal is done, he'll have to sit then. I definitely think that he deserves many more game suspension. And look, he's a great talent on the football field, but his actions have shown him to be a despicable person, at least in this regard. And for anybody defending him and defending his actions and saying that no charges have been filed and yada, 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 get out of here with all that noise. Kill that noise. Keep it a buck. The man behaved despicably. And anybody that didn't have millions of dollars, if you behave that way in any form or fashion, in any type of connection to your workplace, which some of this was, you would at least be out of a job, bar none. We don't even know when Deshaun Watson will play, but when he does, we don't know what he'll look like. He already sat out for a full year from football. He's going to be out of football for 1.5 to 2 years before he ever takes a snap. That's a long time. That's a long time. On the one hand, his body hasn't undergone the punishment of an NFL season. On the other hand, he hasn't had the reps, because throwing to receivers and working out is a whole lot different than live game action, than live reps. So Deshaun Watson has been suspended for 6 games. I think that he deserves more. I think that he'll get more. The NFL has already appealed that ruling, and we'll see what happens there. All right, moving on to our main story in the world of sports this week, our SEC West college football preview. That's right, my babies. We've already covered the SEC East. This week on the show, we're covering the SEC West. Finally. I'm going to let you know how I see things, how these teams will stack up 1 through 7, how I see their season going. And this is what I have. Finishing number 1 overall in the SEC West, I have the Alabama Crimson Tide. I hate to say it. I'm a War Eagle man. But I think Alabama wins the SEC West, and I don't think it's really that close. Alabama is coming off of a 13-2 SEC championship disappointing season. A 13-2 SEC championship disappointing season because they lost to Texas A&M. They lost their rematch to Georgia in the national championship game, falling 33-18. And Nick Saban lost to 2 of his former assistant coaches. He had never lost to an assistant coach, a former assistant coach before, and last season he lost to 2 of them. This season he's going to be out for revenge. He's going to be out for revenge. Alabama is breaking in a new receiving core, new running backs, but they have plenty of talent, replacing some pieces on the offensive line. But I feel like their defense will be much better. They have Bryce Young, who is one of the premier quarterbacks in all of college football. He's tremendously accurate. If he gets better play from his defense and consistent play from his wide receivers, I think that he'll have another great year coming off of a Heisman Trophy season. And one player to watch for Alabama is the transfer running back from Georgia Tech. This kid can flat out play. He was underutilized, played for a team that never put him on TV, and you're going to see him 10 times this year. And he's phenomenal. I think that Alabama goes 12-0 on the year, 8-0 in the SEC, and I have them finishing first in the SEC West. Finishing second in the SEC West this season, I have the Texas A&M Aggies. Jimbo Fisher and crew went 8-4 and 4-4 in the SEC last year. They signed the number 1 recruiting class in the country. They've just been stockpiling talent for the last few years under Jimbo Fisher. This is a recruiting class that some called the greatest recruiting class ever, and that Nick Saban famously said was all bought and paid for, but that's a different story. I digress. The real question for Texas A&M this year will be, what do they have at the quarterback position? They have Haynes King returning, who was named the starter last year before being hurt in the opener. They also have LSU transfer Max Johnson. Which one of those guys will seize the reins, and how well will they play? I expect their defense to be good. They have a good group of receivers. They have a star running back in Devon Achane. They do have a tough 3-game stretch. Right there in the middle of their season, they have a 3-game stretch at Mississippi State, at Alabama, and at South Carolina. I think there's a realistic chance that Texas A&M goes on a 3-game skid and drops all 3 of those games but I also think it might be the only 3 games they lose this year. I have Texas A&M finishing second overall in the SEC West, going 9-3 and 5-3 in the SEC. Finishing third in the SEC West, I have the Fighting Brian Harsons, my Auburn Tigers. That's right, Auburn is in year 2 of the Brian Harsin experiment. They had a tumultuous offseason, to say the least, losing 18 players in the transfer portal, including starting quarterback Bo Nix, who transferred out to Oregon. Auburn replaced both coordinators. There was a coup going on the Plains. Business as usual for Auburn boosters, because rather than support their program, rather than come up with some creative NIL deals, they tried to get a coach fired. They didn't like when Brian Harsin was hired out of Boise. They wanted something more splashy. They didn't believe in him because he doesn't have SEC ties. He's not their guy. They wanted former defensive coordinator Kevin Steele. So when Brian Harsin didn't handle a couple of things publicity-wise very well, when he lost 5 games to end the year, including losing the Birmingham Bowl to Houston, it made for a good opportunity for those boosters to try and get him out of Auburn. And they almost succeeded. But here Brian Harsin is in year 2 of his tenure. He's in a tough spot because if he doesn't win at least 7 games with a couple of upsets, he could be out of a job. He's got to start recruiting better, which he has as of late. I think that he's put together a good coaching staff with a little bit more stability now. Auburn does have Tank Bigsby, one of the better running backs in the country. I think that their defense will be stout again. But like so many other teams, it's going to come down to quarterback play and offensive line play for Auburn. They have an offensive line returning a lot of experience. It just so happens to have been bad experience so far. Can they make improvements in one offseason? Can they turn things around drastically in one offseason? And who is the quarterback going to be for the Auburn Tigers? So far, LSU transfer TJ Finley seems to be little more than an average SEC quarterback, if not slightly below average. Auburn also has a couple of options in transfer Zach Calzada from Texas A&M, who looked phenomenal against Alabama in an upset last year but was uneven the rest of the season. And also the intriguing Robbie Ashford, a kid from Alabama but who transferred back home to Auburn from Oregon. If Auburn can get slightly above average quarterback play and they can navigate their early schedule, I think they could go 8-4 overall and 4-4 in the SEC. Early on in the season, Auburn hosts Penn State, they host LSU, and they travel to Ole Miss. If Auburn wins all 3 of those games, I think they go 8-4. They finish 3rd overall in the SEC West. If they lose 2 or 3 of those games, they may slide down to 6-6, and they might be looking for a new head football coach. So it's going to be interesting on the Plains, as it always is. I don't see a 9 or 10 win season or anything crazy, but I don't see Auburn being as bad as the media has predicted. The SEC media had Auburn slotted in at 7th in the conference. I just think they have more talent than that. And I think with Brian Harsin's back against the wall, his players will rally around him, the fans will rally around the team, and Auburn will surprise people this year. Finishing 4th in the SEC West, I have the Arkansas Razorbacks. I love what the Razorbacks are doing under Sam Pittman. They're recruiting phenomenally. They're getting quality depth on their offensive and defensive lines. They're getting bigger. They're getting faster. They have returning quarterback KJ Jefferson, who is one of the more intriguing athletes in all of the Southeastern Conference. And a lot of how they look this year will depend on their defensive line depth and the level of consistency with which KJ Jefferson can play. Can KJ Jefferson raise his level of play to be an elite-level SEC quarterback 10 out of 12 games this year? If so, then I think Arkansas can compete with and could beat anyone on their schedule. If he's inconsistent, then they're going to slide down a couple spots. Arkansas is in an interesting position because they're a team on the come-up. I actually think that they could be an even better team this year, but win less games. They open the season against Cincinnati. They play a tough non-conference game against BYU. I think Arkansas loses to both Texas A&M and Alabama. I think the rest of their schedule is negotiable. I have them going 8-4 overall, 4-4 in the SEC, finishing 4th in the SEC West. Finishing 5th overall in the SEC West, I have the Ole Miss Rebels. Lane Kiffin and crew went 10-3 last year, 6-2 in the SEC, a tremendous season. But they're replacing 11 starters this year. And they have a defense that must take a big leap if they're going to be competitive in a tough SEC Western division. I like Lane Kiffin as a head coach. I think that he's really put things together at Ole Miss. I hope that he stays there and continues to build. I think Ole Miss gets off to a 4-0 start. But then they play Kentucky in a pivotal game. And after the Kentucky game, they have a very tough backloaded schedule with A&M and Alabama and Auburn and a lot of other teams. If Ole Miss wants to have another great season like they did last year, they've got to find a way to win that Kentucky game. Because if they lose that one and then go into the gauntlet, it might not be too good. Not to sound like a broken record, but a lot of it will come down to quarterback play with USC transfer Jackson Dart. Is he going to be the guy? Is he capable of leading that football team? Does he fit the system that Lane Kiffin plays on offense? Is he mobile in the pocket? Does he take care of the football? Because they have speed, they have playmakers, but they're replacing a lot. And I have Ole Miss going 7-5 overall, 3-5 in the SEC, and finishing 5th in the SEC West. Finishing 6th overall in the SEC West, I have the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Mississippi State went 7-6 last year, 4-4 in the SEC. Head coach Michael Leach is entering his 3rd season. He's got returning quarterback Will Rogers. And he's got a recipe for some interesting games. Because with Will Rogers and Mike Leach, they're going to throw the ball around the field. They're going to come up with points. They're going to be an interesting football team. They're going to have to find a way to be able to run the ball a little bit. They weren't so consistent in that regard last year. But they're going to throw the ball around the field. They're going to score points. They look to have a very good defense this year. I like their linebackers. I like their defensive line. They've added depth. The issue for Mississippi State and really for Mike Leach football teams is an issue of consistency. Because it usually takes 2 or 3 years for Mike Leach to get into a program and to build it the way that he wants and to get the right type of players and athletes and yada, yada, yada. And every once in a while with that air raid, if they can find a good defense and if they can be consistent as a football team, then they appear to come out of nowhere. And Mississippi State is a team this year that next week you might be surprised where I have them ranked. When we talk top 25, you might be surprised where they fit in. They're an interesting team. But in looking at their schedule, I just think they're going to take their lumps. I have Mississippi State going 7-5 overall, 3-5 in the SEC. And finishing last in the SEC West this year, I have the LSU Tigers. Yeah, I'm probably the only one, but I have the LSU Tigers. LSU went 6-7 and 3-5 in an up and down, topsy-turvy, disappointing year last year. And they had a historically bad defense. They had a defense that for an LSU football program was historically bad. They gave up yards and points galore. They were inconsistent in every facet of the game, and they brought in Brian Kelly from Notre Dame and a tremendous hire in the offseason. Might be a little bit weird of a fit culturally. It's not going to matter once they start winning football games, and I do think they will start winning football games. I just don't think it will be this year. I think he's going to have a rough entrance into the SEC. Who's going to be LSU's quarterback? Is it going to be 6-year senior Miles Brennan that has shown flashes but hasn't been that great or consistent, hasn't remained healthy? Is it going to be transfer Jaden Daniels from Arizona State that is a dual-threat quarterback that has a lot of talent but has never quite put it together? Can their defense improve dramatically in one offseason? They've got loads of talent. Talent is never an issue at LSU. That's why Brian Kelly went there, in addition to some M's. But can they put it together this quickly? I think LSU loses their opener. I think they lose their first game of the season to Florida State. You won't hear very many people predict that, but that's how I see things. I think they lose the opener to FSU. I don't think they have any problems the rest of their non-conference. They're going to beat Southern. They're going to beat New Mexico. They're going to beat UAB. But in the SEC slate, I only have LSU winning 2 games this year. I have them beating Florida, and I have them upsetting Arkansas. I have LSU going 5-7 overall, 2-6 in the SEC. I think Brian Kelly will be great at LSU. I think next year they'll be a much improved team. I'm not sure they have their quarterback yet. I'm not sure they have their defense figured out yet. And here's the thing. Again, this is how I see the SEC West. Alabama 1, Texas A&M 2, Auburn 3, Arkansas 4, Ole Miss 5, Mississippi State 6, and LSU 7. But here's the thing. Making predictions in the preseason is not for the weak of heart, okay? It's very easy to be completely wrong. And look, last year we did some of both, right? We had Cincinnati ranked 2nd overall to begin the season. We moved Georgia to number 1 overall very early in the season before any other poll. We had Kentucky winning double-digit games. We had A&M defeating Alabama. That was all the good. We got it right last year. That's a lot to get right. But we also had Clemson ranked number 1 in our preseason poll. We also had Washington as a top 10, 12 team, and Indiana in the top 15. We also predicted Texas A&M to win the SEC West. We missed a lot too, okay? But I'm taking a shot. And this is how I see things this year. I just think in the SEC West, that Alabama and Texas A&M are head and shoulders above the rest. And I honestly feel like spots 3 through 7 are pretty interchangeable. I think depending on how their quarterbacks and offensive lines look, depending on health of their key players, depending on a couple of upsets, Auburn, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and LSU could finish in any order. And I think to get that part exactly right is going to be near impossible, but this is how I see it. What do you think about this? What do you think about my SEC West predictions? Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter at intheshed4. I would love to hear from you. That's all for the world of sports. Let's switch to this, the news in the world of the paranormal. And for our first story, we're going to keep it at home. We go to Alabama. That's right, my babies. We staying in my home state of Alabama. Photos of real-life Chucky go viral online after residents spot him roaming an Alabama neighborhood. He's back. The possessed murderous doll that terrorized moviegoers in the 1988 hit Child's Play is now roaming the streets of an Alabama neighborhood, as photos of a real-life Chucky have now gone viral. The human Chucky seen in photos standing on the side of the road of a residential neighborhood in Pinson, Alabama, hometown of former Auburn quarterback Bo Nix. He's now at Oregon. He's focused and he's having fun, and he's a dark horse for the Heisman. Waiting for cars to pass was actually a 5-year-old boy named Jackson who brought fear and laughter to people in his community, and probably in that order, I would suggest. Dear parents of the little boy in the Chucky costume in Pinson, Kendra Walden, a resident who witnessed the boy, wrote on Facebook, "Get your kid. I almost had a heart attack." I like you, Kendra. We took some pictures of him, she added. We thought it was so funny. And she wasn't the only one who enjoyed the faux horror, as the photo she posted received more than 15,000 comments and 103,000 shares. Could you imagine seeing this in person? One user responded. This is terrifying, while at the same time brilliant, another said. Jackson's mom, Brittany Reed, told WDHN that Jackson was Chucky for Halloween and that he often wears his costume around the house and around the community. That's just kind of how his personality is, Reed said. He dresses up in different costumes throughout the week. He loves to make people laugh. Reed said she was first notified about the viral photos when she was at work, and a coworker showed them to her, saying dressing up as Chucky in the neighborhood was something her son would do. Then she noticed it was her son in the photos. I zoomed in and said, "Oh my goodness, that's my kid," she told the outlet. Reed then contacted her mother, who was watching Jackson. Her mother admitted to helping him in the costume so he could conduct neighborhood watch. The reaction has been overwhelming, Reed said, with mostly positive comments, some negative backlash, and a few birthday and event invites. Jackson, who the family says is Facebook famous, has politely declined the invites but said he will continue scarring those in his local community. Chucky the character made his cinematic debut in 1988 before starring in several feature films. He also made cameo appearances, and his television show from 2021 is scheduled to have its second season this fall. So, this 5-year-old dressed as Chucky, the murderous child's doll for Halloween? Hey, I'm not judgmental, but that part makes me feel like a better parent, okay? That's a terrifying costume for a 5-year-old. A murderous childhood doll. And then the grandmama watching this kid when he's home from school for the summer. And he's like, hey, grandmama, I want to put on this Chucky costume and go out here in broad daylight and just patrol the neighborhood. And she's like, yeah, okay. Grandparents are the best, aren't they? Grandparents are the greatest. Shout out to Meemaw and Pawpaw. What's up with you? This is terrifying. He's so small that he looked like the real Chucky. He just out here in Pinson running around waving at cars. I hope that they realize pretty quickly, hey, this is a kid in a costume. But that kid sounds like a lot of fun. But I thought that story was pretty funny. The pictures and the video are hilarious. People's reaction to it. Folks really got a kick out of it. You know, we need some humor in the world, and this certainly provided that, in addition to some heart-stopping moments of brief terror. Just horror before you go, hey, I'm fairly certain that's a child. But imagine how Mama must have felt when she's like, oh, that's so funny, that kid, that's my kid. Oh boy. And Grandmama just like, hey, do what you want to do. I'm with you, little man. Let's go terrorize the neighborhood, all right? Yeah. Shout out to Grandmama. That's a pretty funny story. From Alabama to Russia, we go for our next story. Because of course we do. Why wouldn't we? Russian psychic predicts date of Vladimir Putin's death and how he'll meet his end. A Russian TV mystic has foreseen the death of Vladimir Putin and believes that the tyrant's rule of terror will end before 2022 is over. Alexander Kantanistov, and I'm sure that Vladimir Putin Kantanistov his prediction. That was bad even for me. I apologize. Moving on. Who participated in popular Russian show Battle of Psychics, made a series of predictions about the state of Russia throughout the year. Speaking with local media 1 month into the invasion of Ukraine, he predicted that life would become tougher for the Russian public and lead to a growing discontent in the country. That was not hard to foresee. He believed that by mid-April, Russian troops could have been ordered out of neighboring Ukraine, a prediction that has not come true as Putin's so-called special operation rolls into its 4th consecutive month. But Kantanistov noted that the despot could be assassinated before the end of the summer after incidents of poison and physical punishment. He said, from the beginning of June, the most critical period in Putin's life begins. These will be attempts to poison and physically punish the dictator. Putin is likely to intensify the mania of persecution. Mental disorders will affect his decisions in relation to the leadership of the Russian Federation. Repressions may intensify. His people will seem like traitors to him. This will lead to rash acts that will only harm him in the future. The psychic said the tyrant could die inside his office in the Kremlin, as the peak of his life brings the highest probability of his death. He said, the peak of Putin's life is observed until August through September of 2022. During this period, the probability of his death is very high. Most likely, it will come inside his office. Earlier this week, a top Ukrainian general revealed that Putin had survived an assassination attempt shortly after he ordered troops into the Ukraine on February 24th. As one of the most hated men in the world, it's perhaps not a shock to discover that there's been a queue of people wanting the dictator dead over the years. So worried is the warmonger that another may be coming, he surrounded himself with an elite group of snipers and has claimed he is even using body doubles. There are said to have been no fewer than 5 serious assassination attempts involving the tyrant and some real near misses. Now the president refuses to take any chances and has become obsessed with the idea that someone is out to get him, sources close to the Kremlin claim. The Kremlin is heavily guarded around the clock as security was ramped up following the start of his deadly invasion. So we talking Russian psychics on the show because we told you we gonna keep our ear to the ground. And on In the Shed with Wes Anderson, we covering the war in Ukraine in a different way, okay? We told you that Vladimir Putin's out here talking to dolphins. It's a fact. Look it up. We gave you a surefire way to get the man to back down by relentlessly mocking his name publicly, which still has yet to happen. It's a strategy, I'm just saying. And now we bring you this, that a Russian psychic is predicting the poisoning or the assassination of Vladimir Putin by the end of September. And I gotta think that that's probably not a very popular prediction with Mr. Putin. And I'm not sure that it's one I would make if I lived in Russia. I think that that probably increases his chances of being poisoned or assassinated. But hey, he's far braver than I am. His other predictions didn't seem to come true. He was on a television show. Who knows if he's a real psychic or not, or if psychics even exist at all. If they do, where does their power come from? We could go a lot of directions. But the direction we're going to go on the show today is this. Hey, let's keep an eye on it. Let's see if this guy stays alive. And then let's see if anything happens to Mr. Putin. And we can chop it up afterward. But it's certainly interesting that this Russian psychic out here predicting something like this to happen in the next month or two. From Russia, we go to Los Angeles for our next story. Kat Von D says she's throwing out books about witchcraft and the macabre after a series of other major life changes. Kat Von D has made another significant life change. The tattoo artist shared an Instagram post on Thursday that she's throwing out books about witchcraft, magic, and the macabre because they don't align with who she wants to be. This seems to be a major departure for Von D since these themes have long been a part of her aesthetic and brands. Von D's former beauty brand offered a tarot-inspired collection and a black lipstick color named Witches, for example, and her current shoe line offers a coffin-shaped wallet. I've always found beauty in the macabre, but at this point I just had to ask myself, what is my relationship with this content, she wrote on Instagram. And the truth is, I just don't want to invite any of these things into our family's lives, even if it comes disguised in beautiful covers, collecting dust on my shelves. Von D included photos in the post of the book she tossed out and opened up about having pretty meaningful realizations in recent years, with many of them revolving around the fact that she says she got a lot of things wrong in her past. The former makeup mogul also noted that she didn't want her post to seem critical of people who enjoy those topics despite her feelings about them. But right now, it's never been more clear to me that there is a spiritual battle taking place, and I want to surround myself and my family with love and light, she continued. Von D's announcement might seem surprising since she's widely known for her gothic aesthetic, but the controversial figure has previously discussed other transformations she's made in recent years. Weeks after selling her shares of her namesake beauty brand in January 2020, Von D started covering tattoos on her arms with black ink. At the time, she said the tattoos meant nothing to her as she got them before becoming sober. Von D announced in December 2020 that she bought a home in Indiana to escape California's taxes, terrible policies, and tyrannical government. Is it pronounced tyrannical? Tyranny is the word. Is it tyrannical or tyrannical? Because tyrannical sounds like the government is run by some Tyrannosaurus Rexes. And a government run by T-Rexes would not be effective because their arms are just so short. Tyrannical government? I don't know. I digress. More recently, Von D closed her famous tattoo shop, covering more of her tattoos, and listed her California mansion for more than $12 million. Representatives for Kat Von D did not immediately respond to insiders' request for comment. So I thought that this was very interesting because Kat Von D, famous tattoo artist, has always had this gothic aesthetic, right? Has always been into the macabre, has always been a beacon of these sorts of things and this sort of vibe. And she's very intentionally moving away from those things now. And I thought it was cool of her to make sure and say, I'm not saying that this is the decision that everyone should make. I'm not judging anyone. I'm not being harsh towards those who feel differently. That's fine. But as for me and my house, I just want to be about love and light. And I don't want to invite anything in that doesn't belong. And I think that's just a part of maturity as an adult. I think that's a part of understanding that there is a spiritual realm around us, that everything is not just what we can see with our naked eye. And I think that it's a part of setting boundaries, right? We all have the ability to invite in or to bring in whatever types of things that we want. And just like you have a diet when it comes to the food that you consume, and that diet has a certain effect on your body, The same thing is true of your mind, of your mental health, of your spirit and your soul. You have a diet. There are certain things that you choose to take in, that you give priority, that you focus on, that you consume, and those things have an effect on you, on the way that you view the world, on your level of happiness, on your perspective, on the way that you treat other people. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be watching scary movies, okay? That you can't read a Stephen King book. Because, hey, those are things that I enjoy. I enjoy cuddling up with wifey and watching a scary movie. I enjoy reading a Stephen King book. At one house we lived in, I used to sit in the backyard around a fire pit facing the woods and read some Stephen King. And it was cool. It was intense, okay? My little black cat Bernie by my side like, hey, I get it. But you also have to be discerning. And you also have to get to a point in your maturity that you say, just like I work on my diet as far as what I eat, I'm going to work on my diet as far as what I consume, what I invite into my mind, what I invite into my home, what I spend my time doing. And I'm not preaching at you, okay? I'm not telling you what decisions you can or can't make. I'm just saying. Kat Von D has found some boundaries. She's making some changes. I thought it was an interesting story given who she was and who she's becoming. And I think it serves as a good reminder for us too. If you want to be about certain things, you have to surround yourself with those things. If you want to grow into maturity, if you don't want to be hindered, then you've got to take a look at your diet. You got to take a look at what you're consuming. It's a good reminder for anybody and everybody, despite your station in life, despite your faith background, despite what you're into. So good for her for setting some boundaries. Good for her for not being judgmental. May we all do the same. From Los Angeles, we go to Georgia for our final story. What are the Georgia Guidestones, and where did they come from? The Georgia Guidestones is a group of stones forming a granite monument in Elbert County, Georgia, located off of Guidestone Road, just east of Highway 77, about 90 miles east of Atlanta, 45 miles from Athens, and 7 miles from the town of Elberton, locally known as the granite capital of the world. The locally mined stones feature one slab in the center with 4 arranged around it. A capstone lies on top of the 5 slabs, which are each astronomically aligned. The total height is 19 feet and 3 inches. An additional stone tablet set in the ground a short distance to the west of the structure provides some notes about the history. Nicknamed American Stonehenge, the monument's purpose is somewhat ambiguous. The project was commissioned in June 1979 by a man using the alias Robert C. Christian. He approached the Elberton Granite Finishing Company on behalf of a quote-unquote small group of loyal Americans and explained that the stones would function as a compass, a calendar, and a clock, and should be capable of withstanding catastrophic events. That in and of itself is a little bit dubious and alarming. If I'm the granite company and they want me to build something and they're like, it must withstand catastrophic events, I'm like, get up out of my office right now. We just talked about diet. I'd be like, I'm not consuming this. And then I would say, well, how much does it pay? According to Wired, Joe Findley of Elberton Granite assumed that Mr. Christian was a nut and attempted to discourage him by providing a quote for the commission, which was several times higher than any project the company had previously undertaken. He also tried to tell Mr. Christian that the Guidestones would require additional tools and consultants, but much to Mr. Findley's surprise, Mr. Christian accepted the quote. How? How did Mr. Christian accept the quote, and how much did it cost? Was it funded by Bill Gates? Was it funded by Nancy Pelosi's husband? Was it funded by Joe Rogan? I am Joe Rogan. This episode is gone off the rails. I'm being canceled for sure. While arranging payment, Mr. Christian said that he represented an anonymous group that had been planning the project for 20 years and provided a scale model with 10 pages of specifications. A 5-acre site was purchased from a local farmer, and the completed monument was unveiled before a crowd of a couple hundred people on the 22nd of March, 1980. A planned time capsule was never buried beneath the stone tablet, but it does list the sponsors as a small group of Americans who seek the age of reason. The 4 outer upright stones are placed to mark the limits of the 18.6-year lunar declination cycle, whereas the center column has a hole drilled at an angle through it that aligns with the North Star. And I don't know why, but I'm already creeped out. I don't understand these astrological things. And it's a little bit creepy. Where did the moon come from? We don't even know. We don't even know. So when you start talking all this astrological stuff, and I'm like, hey, where did the moon come from? Maybe something collided with Earth, they say. But we don't know. Back to the Georgia Guidestones. The central pillar also has a slot carved through it, which is aligned with the sun's solstice and equinoxes. A small aperture in the capstone allows a ray of sun to pass through at noon each day, shining a beam on the center stone, indicating the day of the year. Each of the outer vertical stone blocks is also inscribed with a 10-part message in 8 different languages: English, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, Hebrew, Hindi, and Swahili. The messages are guidelines for humanity. They are as follows. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Under 500 million. We're at like 7.8 billion people. And these Guidestones and these quote-unquote loyal, reasonable Americans are saying population control. Moving on. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Okay, I guess I'm all right with that. I don't know what guiding reproduction means. Are we talking eugenics? Are we just saying get fit and diversity? Sounds good. I don't know. Unite humanity with a living new language. Rule, passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. I'm down with that one. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Interesting idea. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Yeah, we could do a lot with that one, couldn't we? Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Balance personal rights with social duties. Prize truth, beauty, and love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. Very interesting set of guidelines. What do they mean? Who wrote them? Where did they come from? Chris Kubis, Executive Vice President of the Elberton Granite Association, which has a role in maintaining the Guidestones, says the instructions were meant for a future population after a cataclysmic event. Very interesting. So were the Guidestones put up by a doomsday group or some type of cult that thought that there was going to be the end of all things, and that a small band of civilization that numbered under 500 million would be left, and they could use those to restart society? And is this a TV show that will be premiering on AMC in the next 6 months? Because if not, it should be. Why did they not find the Georgia Guidestones in The Walking Dead? That took place in Georgia. Why didn't you find the Georgia Guidestones, Rick? Rick Grimes? What are you doing? You could have rebuilt society by now, sir. Instead, you off who knows where with them crazy trash people. I still watch that show. The ambiguity of purpose and secrecy surrounding the commissioning of the project has fueled conspiracy theories over the years, with allegations that the message on the slabs are instructions for the coming New World Order. I mean, they did mention world courts and a couple of things where I could see where some people might say that. Far-right conspiracy theorist Candace Taylor, who ran in the state's Republican gubernatorial primary against incumbent Brian Kemp, made the destruction of the Guidestones a central pillar of her campaign. Mrs. Taylor claims the Guidestones are satanic. Interesting thing to run on. Not, hey, I'm going to fix health care. Hey, I'm going to improve our roads and bridges. She's like, hey, let's destroy these stones that have carvings on them. Elect me as governor of your state. She didn't win. In a segment on Miss Taylor and the Stones, HBO's Last Week Tonight found footage claiming to reveal the true identity of Robert C. Christian as an alleged eugenics-supporting fan of white supremacist David Duke. Yo. Is that true? Can that be proven? It did say about controlling population. It also mentioned diversity, though. Interesting. I would like to see some evidence about that, but very interesting. In November 2008, the Stones were attacked by vandals and spray-painted with tags including "Jesus will beat you, Satanist," and "No one world government." And Alex Jones is on trial this week. Conspiracy theories aside, locals were disappointed after an explosion in the early hours of July 6, 2022 that partially demolished the monument. The Elbert County Chamber of Commerce said it was saddened to learn of the apparent intentional destruction of its most frequently visited community attraction. Over the years, the Guidestones have created lots of discussion and brought visitors to Elbert County from all over the world. Whatever your personal opinion on the Guidestones is, this attack is bad for our community. We hope that whomever is responsible is apprehended and brought to justice, a statement read. Mr. Cubis added, "I'm sad not just for Elberton and Elbert County, I'm sad for the United States and the world." Did you put it up, Mr. Cubis? You sound... Mr. Cubis sounds very supportive and saddened by the fact that these Guidestones have been destroyed. Maybe he is Mr. Christian. These were a tourist attraction, and it was not uncommon for people around the world to be up here at any given time, he added. To quarry something of that size and get those four of them that precise, with the sandblasting it took to letter those languages, that is utter craftsmanship that you wouldn't find anywhere else. Except for all over the world. Except for all over the world, Mr. Cubis. Because have you not heard of the pyramids, or the actual Stonehenge, or the Washington Monument, or a whole host of other things? But yes, your stone, 19-foot tall stone structure in Georgia was very impressive before it was blown up by some crazy person. I would start the investigation with that lady that ran for governor. Just a hunch. I'm not a professional. I'm just a man in a shed in Alabama. But I would start there. Because if she's out here claiming that the whole thing is satanic and made it the brunt of her run for governor, maybe she might have known who had something to do with this. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. So, the Georgia Guidestones, I'm not sure it's satanic. Some things on there are so easy to agree with. Some of those things I don't necessarily agree with. I'm not for limiting a population, controlling it, and eliminating billions and billions of lives. I do think we should be more fit. I like that part. I do think that we should get rid of excess laws and officials, sure. Was it put up by white supremacists? Was it put up by Satanists? Was it put up by a group of reasonable atheists that want to move away from faith and move toward reason? Was it put up by a doomsday prepper group or some type of cult that thought the world would have come to an end by now? What do you think, my babies? Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Get at us on Twitter at intheshed4 and let us know what you make of the Georgia Guidestones. Who do you think put them up? Who was this group of loyal Americans? Were they a negative thing? Were they a positive thing? What do you agree with or disagree with about the message contained within them that was written in so many different languages? It truly is an interesting thing and a fun mystery to think about, something that has galvanized discussion in the American South ever since it was erected back in the 80s, and something that is still interesting now in 2022, even after being blown up by some unknown vandal or group of vandals. The mystery of the Georgia Guidestones persists. That's all for this week. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I can't either. It's back in the house and out of the shed for me. Thanks again for listening to episode 47. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, and review. It really does help. If you have any paranormal experiences, opinions about sports, or politics that you'd like to share, you can email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Again, that's intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. I might even read it on air. Look for us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, the Good Pods app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to follow us on Twitter at InTheShed4. Tune in again next week when we'll hit the headlines, unveil our preseason college football top 25 rankings, and investigate together the incredible story of an alien-human hybrid gun runner. This has been In the Shed with Wes Anderson, the best news show in the land covering politics, sports, and the paranormal. Have an adventurous and fulfilling weekend. I'll catch you tools later. Peace out, Boy Scout. Meemaw, we made it!